Yeah, I had Richard Herman here a couple weeks ago, and he said he thinks there's going to be acquittal, and he thinks that there might be riots, in essence, if there is an acquittal.
I wouldn't doubt it. I wouldn't doubt that there will be some serious public backlash if there's an acquittal. However, I also am not so sure that I would go so far as to say that to guess as to what a jury will do once the facts are truly known.
One thing we learned is we can never guess a jury verdict. Case Anthony and
exactly.
Okay, so I wanted to bring you back to 2005. You're working for Fox then, right?
Yep.
Okay,
Fox
so you're part of the media that is out to get Michael Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
And,
yes, I was.
So take me to the part where you said to yourself that you want to make this right, that you want to look at this over. What made you decide that, you know what, this is what I want to do. This I feel strongly about this, and I don't care what my confidants say. This is what I'm going to do. Where were you, like, in terms of, like, did a thought just come to your head? Did you see something on TV that maybe something triggered you? Because when we spoke before, you said this happened after the trial. You started researching.
Yes. What triggered me was that the day of the verdict, when I was asked by Bill O'Reilly, what do you think of this verdict? Did the jury get it right? And in that moment where I had to answer him live via satellite from Santa Maria, I realized that I had to say, yes, I guess they got it right. And then I started to ponder, if they got it right, then what have I been talking about all these months about Jackson being, salacious with children and all the things that I've been reporting. And so initially what I did was I went over to Neverland and followed all the fans over there. And because I was media, I was able to pass through the miles of fans on the street in Los Olivos leading up to Neverland. When I got to the gates of Neverland, there were all these media trucks interviewing fans, and fans were weeping and crying because he'd been, acquitted. And I started to kind of think about how much his fans truly love him and why they flew from all over the world for all those months to be with him, and how adamant they were about him not being a pedophile, about there being nothing wrong about him being with children, and that in other countries around the world, there's not all of that much emphasis. If somebody spends time with children or sleeps in a bed with children, it's not considered pedophilia in other countries. And that's another thing that people hammered at with me, especially Europeans, during the aftermath of the verdict. And I listened and I kind of thought, well, yes and no, I don't know. And it took me about 6 months, really, of doing my own soul searching and realizing that I need to go back to Santa Maria and request to see all the evidence. And if I can get that judge to allow me to see it, then I'm going to sit and look at this for myself alone, without the noise of all the media around me.
Right.
And that's what I did. I went to Santa Maria. I requested to see the evidence before I got there, and I got a court order allowing me to go through the evidence. And when I got there, they had ready for me, and they had, boxes and boxes of photos and transcripts and tapes, and I was guarded. There were things I could photocopy, there were things I could make pictures of pictures, and then there were things that I had to watch and sit in person and watch in the basement of that courthouse. And I did all of that. And the more I played the tape of the accuser Gavin Arvizo in his police interview with the Santa Barbara sheriffs, the more I kept replaying it. And ultimately, I turned to the court clerk who was, monitoring me, and I said, I've never had children, but I'm watching this kid say that he doesn't know what masturbation is to the officers, and he's 13 at the time that he was doing this interview about allegedly being molested. And I turned to her and I said, is that right? Because that doesn't make any sense to me. And she said, no, that's not right.
No, that isn't. I can tell you firsthand.
Yeah. So she had a son. I said, you have boys? And she said, yes. And I said, so, because to me, a thing like that that's so kind of obvious, it's like, so blunt, and it's just a bald-faced lie. Why would he lie about that? What would be the purpose of saying, I don't even know what it is, masturbation? It just didn't ring true. And so then I started to really look at the whole interview again to see what was ringing true in what he was telling the police. And the more I looked at it, the more I realized they were leading him down the path of Michael being, having approached him and having touched him. He was not leading them. And unlike children who have to be drawn out that are truly victims of sexual molestation, this kid was, he was being drawn out to some degree, but he couldn't remember, and his demeanor during the interview wasn't believable. And later not long after, I contacted the jury foreman from the Michael Jackson trial, Paul Rodriguez,
yes.
And Rodriguez told me that the biggest thing and reason that the jury came up with acquittal and not guilty was they looked at that same tape of Gavin Arvizo, the accuser, and they looked at it like 5 or 6 times, he said. And he asked, why were we looking at it that many times? And because he said they were looking for the kid's demeanor. Was he telling the truth? Was he nervous? Was he anxious? And they all came to the same conclusion, that this...
Yes, okay, let's start from the beginning. Michael Jackson arrested in November of 2003. I believe he was filming a video, correct me if I'm wrong, and he was taken in from Vegas to Santa Barbara with his then counsel, Mark Geragos. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. So in between that time, 6 to 8 months passed, and I believe you let go of Mark Geragos, and he hired you. Can you tell me how you basically got into this case?
Well, when Neverland was raided in November of 2003, I started getting calls from people close to Michael in Las Vegas asking me to come out and meet him, that he wanted to hire me. And I was defending. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I was defending actor Robert Blake in his high-profile homicide case. I was returning from a vacation in Northern California, and my phone just started ringing, and I said I can't do both of them. And then in February of 2004, we started picking a jury in the Blake homicide case, and he and I had a strong disagreement, and the judge couldn't resolve it, and I withdrew from the case. And as soon as I did that, Randy Jackson called me and said, look, we've always wanted you. Johnny Cochran always said you're the one that can win the case. We don't like our current lawyers. We think they're way over their head and can't cope with these prosecutors who've been after Michael for, 12 years or more. And he asked me, are you free? I said, yes, I am. And I secretly flew to Florida to meet Michael. Randy was there. Grace was there for an interview. And it was all done very quietly at a big home that Michael was renting. I was asked a lot of questions about my background and my values and the cases I'd handled and my record and all that. I left not knowing what was going to happen, and then shortly thereafter, Randy called me and said, we want you. So I flew back to Florida, and Geragos was fired, and, everything worked out.
And you say Randy a lot. Now, is it fair to say that Randy was, besides his family, most active in terms of, getting Michael the right, proper legal counsel, getting him right for this trial? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, Randy was running Michael's finances and giving him a lot of direction. I would say, Randy and his mother were the strongest people, the most important people in Michael's life at the time. But Randy was very influential. I had known Randy for years. I had not known Michael. And
how did you meet Randy?
We met socially a number of years before, and every once in a while we would get together and have dinner and laugh. And, I never had done any legal work for Randy or the Jacksons, but he knew me, and he watched the 3-week televised preliminary hearing on the Robert Blake homicide case when I got him free on bail in a case where nobody had ever gotten bail in California before. It was a murder with special circumstances case where he could have faced death, and no one had ever gotten bail in a case like that over prosecution objection. And I kind of hammered the prosecution's witnesses for about 3 weeks and got Blake bail, and Randy was very impressed by that. And he said he always wanted me, and he said they were very uncomfortable with Geragos. They thought he was way over his head and couldn't win the case.
And we were talking about Geragos' record before we got on the air a couple days ago, and not too great of a record in terms of the amount of years he put in. I'm not saying he's not a great lawyer. I don't know. I'm not in that field, but from what everybody says, from a lot of people I've spoken to in the industry, Geragos is more of a guy that you want if you're in a DWI case, if you're a star and and you need a spokesperson. He's a showman. That's what other people's. That's my hearsay, if you will, from other people. Is that accurate?
Well, Randy investigated Mark for his brother. His brother had a bad feeling. Just didn't think he was right for the case. Thought he was way over his head and not sophisticated enough to handle Tom Sneddon and the DA's office that have been building a case for, as I said, at least 12 years. Randy then investigated, or told me he investigated Geragos' background, and Randy's comment to me was he's more famous for being famous than he is for winning trials, and I want someone that's not going to be, intoxicated by the media, someone who can win hard cases. And he said he and his brother spoke to Johnny Cochran, and Johnny Cochran at that time had a brain tumor that, wasn't publicized that it was malignant, but they spoke to him at the hospital, and he told them, I'm just quoting Randy, he said, if I was in trouble, I'd want Tom Mesereau, and he'll win the case. And I'm very flattered to hear that, because I think Johnny Cochran was one of the greatest trial lawyers ever in American history, and also a very humble, nice man besides, someone I've always admired and looked up to. And to get an endorsement like that was very, very meaningful to me, but that's what happened.
Were your feelings about Cochran solely because of the case he won for O.J., or did you know him before that and after that?
No, Johnny Cochran was a legend in Los Angeles, both as a criminal defense attorney and as a civil trial lawyer before Simpson.
Right.
Numerous criminal cases, numerous civil cases, was highly respected. He'd been number 2 in the DA's office at one point, and just a highly respected lawyer and personality in Los Angeles, known as a very humble, decent guy who really stood up for causes, a man of principle, and just a very gifted trial lawyer. He really knew how to speak to people because he understood ordinary people. And, he to get his endorsement meant so much to me. We both got awards together. After I got Blake free, we both got awards together in the same evening. I got Criminal Defense Lawyer of the Year, and he got Lifetime Achievement by the Century City Bar Association in Los Angeles. And he got up in his speech and got some very kind words from me, which I really have never forgotten. But at any rate, he also advised, or told me actually, because the last time I saw him was shortly before I moved to Santa Maria, where I lived for 6 months, Santa Maria in northern Santa Barbara County, California, where the trial took place. I met him at his home, and he had he was sort of having trouble walking. He was thin. He had an aluminum cane, And he told me that he did not want Geragos defending Michael, and he was very happy I was in the case. And it was the last time I saw him alive. In the middle of a jury trial, he passed away, and Michael, my co-counsel and law partner Susan Yu, and Michael, the three of us went down and went to his funeral in Los Angeles.
That was during the actual trial, right?
Yes. I had asked the judge for permission to go to the trial, and he declined my request. But it just coincidentally, there was no court that day. So we had a limousine. It picked, when Michael was in it, he picked up Susan, he picked up me, and we all went down to Los Angeles to the funeral and came back.
Now, you're representing Michael Jackson. You know, the day you get word that you're going to represent Michael Jackson, is there a little bit of anxiety on your part? I mean, you know how big Michael Jackson is, maybe the top 5 people in the world. Even then, you know, with Muhammad Ali, Michael Jordan, and the Beatles, and maybe somebody that I'm not thinking of right now. Is there a little bit of anxiety, no matter what the charges were? You know,
there was a lot of anxiety because I really didn't know Michael yet, and I approach every case with as much objectivity as I can. I don't believe the prosecution. I don't believe the defense. I have to find out for myself. And I didn't really know him well. The media was just crucifying Michael, claiming he was a molester, talking about settling cases for large sums of money, and he's being vilified in the press, just almost tortured like an animal as far as I was concerned. I did not like that, but nevertheless, I wanted to sit down with him and talk with him and size him up and look at the evidence myself and come to my own conclusions. There was also some anxiety. You know, some friends of mine had warned me not to take the case. They said, you can't win the case, and if you lose it, he's going to go to prison and probably die in prison, and fans all over the world are going to resent you. They're going to, everywhere you go, they're going to say he's the one that's responsible for Michael Jackson dying in prison. And I was hearing stories like that. But nevertheless, I sat back and said to myself, I'm a criminal defense lawyer. This is what I was meant to do. This is the skill and the profession that God gave me, and I made my decision. But sure, there was anxiety throughout that case. Everybody was trying to trip you up. You know, the prosecution had invested so many millions of dollars in trying to convict him. They had a public relations firm. They had the entire, Santa Barbara Sheriff's Department. They had experts everywhere. They were using the FBI in Quantico, Virginia. They were calling Interpol, the International Police Agency, to get information. I mean, they were stopping at nothing to try and convict Michael Jackson. And, of course, he had so many wonderful fans throughout the world who were hoping I could save him. And it was stressful, I have to say, but well worth it. I feel blessed by God that I was even there and that we came through and saved the life of a very wonderful, kind, decent artist and humanitarian. He was one of the most extraordinary people I will ever meet, and I was very lucky to be there, let's put it that way.
Last week, it picked up here in New York, in the New York Daily News. They took the Mirror in the UK, I think, reported 24 boys. Mike paid off $35 million. Well, they pretty much copied and pasted it right here in New York, and you would have thought it was coming from them.
Yeah,
so,
it was the Sunday People that published it, which is the sister newspaper of the Mirror. So the Mirror runs Monday to Sunday, but it has a second Sunday edition called the Sunday People.
Now, the first thing that came to my mind is, first of all, they had a trial in 2005. The character that's talking about it has no credibility, as far as I'm concerned. Now, but that's just me speculating. What do you know? Because I know you printed out an article about the settlement that never was. What could you share about that?
Yeah, well, probably the most disturbing part of the story that the Sunday People ran was a claim that Michael Jackson had settled a case of child molestation in 1992, which, of course, would predate the Jordan Chandler case of 93. Now, the narrative that the fans and that the whole world has come to understand is that Jordan Chandler was the first accuser, and then all of the others came afterward. So had it turned out that there'd been a secret settlement in 92 before Jordan Chandler, then of course the implication of that is that, what on earth are the odds that there would have been another a secret false accusation before Jordan Chandler's false accusation. So the story is clearly designed to give the impression that, in fact, this was something that had been going on for a period of time before the Jordan Chandler case, and therefore the idea that the Jordan Chandler accusation was false is not to be believed. Now, this settlement, the story of this settlement, has been in the public domain since at least 2005, when it was written about on the Fox News website. And it came from a series of tapes which were handed over to Michael Jackson's defense in 1994. Michael Jackson, in 94, hired a private investigator called Anthony Pellicano to represent him, to investigate his accuser and to help build up a case for conspiracy to defraud him out of money. So these tapes were handed to Anthony Pellicano's office by a tabloid journalist called Jim Mitjager, who he worked for the National Enquirer, and he was, as the tapes revealed, he was involved in the process with numerous people of paying them money and badgering them to try to get them to make accusations against Michael Jackson. Now, among these files that were given to Michael Jackson's defense by Mitjager was this supposed settlement document from 1992. Now, the document, Mitjager, in his notes, said that he never saw the settlement document. It was read out to him over the phone by a woman called Taylor Shea. And Taylor Shea was a serial tipster who used to ring up Mitjager and give him information about various celebrities for money. And so she read out this alleged document, and he paid her some money for the story. And really no more was known about it. He wasn't able to find out any more about this supposed settlement in 1992. Now, in 2005, the prosecutors in the Michael Jackson case had access to all of these documents because by this point, Anthony Pellicano had been imprisoned on unrelated wiretapping charges. And so when he'd been arrested, they'd seized all of the material from his office, included in which was the Michael Jackson stuff. And so
right.
in the FBI's possession was all of these tapes which had been handed to Pellicano by this tabloid reporter. And so among there, they found this transcript of a supposed settlement document. So they handed it over to the prosecutors in Michael Jackson's case. And they looked into it, and they were unable to find any evidence at all that this was a legitimate settlement. The person who was named in the document as the child who was settled with turned out not to exist. The mother turned out not to exist. They couldn't find any record that this settlement had ever actually been paid, and the woman who sold the supposed transcript of this settlement document to Jim Mitjager turned out not to exist. Taylor Shea, it turned out, had used multiple aliases to deal with multiple tabloid journalists, had sold lots of stories to tabloid journalists, and then disappeared off the face of the earth and was never heard of again. So it was as far as the police were able to ascertain, the supposed 1992 settlement was a fraud. It didn't happen. It was a made-up story which was sold to a tabloid reporter by somebody who didn't exist. And so this has all been in the public domain. As I say, it was reported by Fox 411 during the course of the 2005 trial. But the People has run this story as though it's something new or exclusive, and the fact is that it's not. And all of this information, as I said, has been in the public domain for something approaching a decade now, and the story was incredibly irresponsible and inaccurate.
Well, the one time, Michael was actually brought to court and faced all of these witnesses at trial, because he really was essentially tried for both the case he was being tried for, but he was also being tried for the Jordan Chandler case in that courtroom, and there was a lot of evidence about that. Admitted, yes. And virtually every every witness. I can't think of a single one. In fact, I don't think there was a single one who wasn't torn apart on cross-examination by Mesereau, and every time would show that they were after money, that they had changed their stories, that they tried to, in some way profit from changing their story or telling the story that they thought the media wanted to hear. And there's no question the media was invested, especially the tabloid media, but all of the media really was invested in the idea that Michael was a child molester, and because that made it a great story in their minds. And when he was acquitted, the story was a lot less interesting. And when the evidence that he was innocent was admitted during the trial, that was not very interesting to them either. I mean, they were all running out. They'd hear the direct testimony, and they'd all run out and make their reports on these lurid accusations. Meanwhile, in the courtroom, Mesereau was destroying that witness and making him look in the eyes of the jury in the eyes of the jury like a liar. But that wasn't covered, that wasn't reported, and so people who were just, following the case in the media were getting a really, skewed point of view.
I always say, if you want to see a real pedophile, just follow the Jerry Sandusky case. What's your thoughts on the Jerry Sandusky trial and Jerry Sandusky? Was he a pedophile?
Well, he certainly looks like he was a horrific pedophile. I mean, I don't know the details of the case that well. I didn't cover that, and I don't.
Right.
I'm not inside, but all of the evidence that came out that I'm aware of made him look, like a monster, and it's just, I think it's kind of shocking to us all that someone that monstrous could remain at large and doing what he was doing for so long, but. It's a subject people turn away from. Is a lot of it. I mean, people don't want to believe it's happening. They don't want to be involved in it happening. And and if you're a person of power and status, people don't want to go against you.
And the other journalist, back to that, Ian Halpert also concluded that Michael Jackson was not a pedophile, but he did say some other things. What did you think of his book, if you read it? Or
Ian Halpern has zero credibility in my eyes. I mean, he's beneath talking about, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. Okay, so let's go to 2005. We have the Martin Bashir documentary, and the family claims that they were molested. What's his name? Gavin was molested, not during, not around, but after the Martin Bashir trial, after the Martin Bashir documentary.
Yeah, well, that was a particularly difficult argument to swallow for the jury, and what the jury didn't even know was that the prosecution had originally claimed that the molestation took place at a different time. But then they found out that Michael Jackson had a rock-solid alibi for that particular date. So they changed it to a different date, and that date was after the Bashir documentary had aired, which, as Mesereau said, could you imagine a more absurd time for someone to do what Michael was, accused of doing? I mean, the whole world is looking at him and wondering about him, and then that's the moment he chooses to molest this boy. I mean, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Well, I was considered director of security for Michael, and my duties were to ensure that his family remained safe at all times. I was basically in charge of his security. However, once Michael and I got to know each other at a really quick pace, because we spent so much time together, and then I came highly recommended from somebody that was a confidant to his brother Randy, and Randy and I had known each other, and Michael really trusted Randy. So once I was in, some of my security details went into other duties that I did for Michael, but mainly I just ensured that he and his family were safe. And prior to that, I was a police officer for Los Angeles for over 20 years, and so I had some significant background in terms of executive protection, and I had worked for a few other celebrities prior to Michael, but obviously he was the ultimate, and it was amazing what I did, in our relationship, how it grew. I initially thought I was just going to be kind of a part of another security detail. And I did inherit, if you would, we can refer to it as that, a couple of guys that were with him prior to me. And we actually started I started in, I think, February of 2004, and then it went on into the earlier part of 2006 and 7. So it was an amazing time. It went from, meeting him and meeting his family, and I was quite nervous, but he made me feel just very, very comfortable. The first day I met him and got in there, and he and the kids came in and introduced him.
Let me stop you for 1 second. We also find ourselves in a similar situation as last year, where I'm stopping you to introduce, ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce another bodyguard. He spent time with Michael Jackson in 2006. He went all over the world with Michael Jackson. His name is Mike Garcia, and he joins us on King Jordan Radio. Good evening, Mike. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you doing, Jordan?
Say hello to Kerry.
How you doing, Mike?
Good to hear from you again. Pleasure to hear from you again.
Good to hear from you.
Okay, Kerry, if you can, please continue.
Oh, I kind of didn't know where I left off. But it was an interesting time when I was with Michael. It was very difficult at times. I had never, like I said, I'd had experience dealing with celebrities, but nobody of his magnitude that was so recognizable all over the world. And I kind of learned that the hard way very quickly with some of his fan base and some of the things that they tried to do. They really tested my, security and executive protection skills like no other. But
right.
It was very interesting. They get real creative. The fans are amazing. His fans they have resources that I never did understand, and I would talk to several of them, and because no matter where we were on the planet, they were there. It's like, how do you guys get this money to just fly all over the place, and stay in hotels and all of that? But I learned a lot from them, and it was a good time with Michael for the most part.
And Mike, you could speak to that in terms of the Michael Jackson fans. How was Michael Jackson in your experience dealing with the fans?
How was he dealing with the fans? He was very gracious with the fans. I was just listening to Terry speak right now, and he was just kind of listening to him speak, just kind of brought in some memories as far as, and I totally agree. I had the same question, like how did they find him? We were working our best to, really kind of be confidential about our whereabouts, and Terry probably, it was just too where they would just show up. There was a time in which Mr. Jackson came from L.A. and I greeted him. I was there to greet him. Came on a chauffeured bus, and there was a girl who was always every day hanging out in front of the house here in Vegas, and she would bring Mr. Jackson some cookies and and some cakes and things like that. And she was out there every day, and we'd go out there and give her water. Of course, it was 110 degrees and whatnot. And Mr. Jackson, this is when we came back from Virginia, and he was coming here from L.A., and the bus came, and greeted him, say hi to the kids and all that kind of stuff. And as I came off the bus, I could see in the car was this girl, and I was thinking to myself, did she follow the bus all the way here? And, in asking questions as far as, who knew as far as Mr. Jackson, the whereabouts and how he was coming here, nobody could figure out how she did it, and just like Terry mentioned, it definitely keeps you on your toes. It definitely keeps you, an open mind as far as your craft is in doing executive protection. But I tell you what, he appreciated it, as much as being surprised of somebody showing up or whatnot. He truly appreciated it, and he loved the love that he got from the fans, and he generally loved the fans back. Yesterday I was doing another interview in which that. The fans, we were in New York, and the fans, in Times Square, and the fans were there and everything else, and it was overwhelming, it being in New York City Times Square. And Mr. Jackson kind of scolded me on the way home about how to, be a little bit nicer. And
he scolded
I learned
you?
from that. In a sense, and him being one of my heroes, it just kind of brought me down in the car. But it definitely keeps you on your toes. There's, like Terry mentioned, there's nobody else that has that kind of response, from people. And it's amazing. I spoke on it yesterday in the other interview. It's just amazing how he has that aura or that magic, and it's almost, I don't know, it's just a connection with his fans that I've never seen. And I've worked for a lot of more celebrities and everything else, and it's not the same. It's just not the same. It's definitely a lot more, love that's shown between both parties, the fans and Mr. Jackson. And definitely celebrities
in California. I mean, the thing I got to talking about listening to They Don't Care About Us is I was in Rio with Michael, and it was incredible because people would just hang on to his van all the time. And people have no idea how long I've known Michael. I mean, I've known Michael since
when did you start?
I started with Michael in 1984. I knew him till the day he passed away. And he was the most incredible person. Now, there is someone called Ryan White. Do you remember who Ryan White was?
That was the young man, I believe, that had AIDS, right?
Right. And he got thrown out of school in Kokomo, Indiana. He was thrown out of school because he had AIDS. Michael not only brought him to his house, he bought him a Mustang, and he was supposed to live 6 months. After he met Michael, he lived 5 years. Now, together with Michael, under President Bush, we had the Ryan White Act passed. That remains to this day the most important AIDS piece of legislation in the world. And that, as of 2014, a version of it in Africa has saved more than 1 million lives of young African children who had AIDS, preventing it. So what people don't understand, the things that Michael did. Now, he once called me from Romania. Because I remember that tour he began in Romania. He said he had a young girl with liver. I didn't know if he wanted liver, because I knew a great liver restaurant in Hungary. No, he wanted me to get the girl a liver transplant, and there was a child in Hungary. So I arranged through Harvard to get the child a liver transplant. And I mean, he was the most incredible person, but many things were devastating to him. I think how it really started, the worst thing ever, was a child molestation event with Jordie Chandler, which was a big hoax. And I think the fact that Howard Weitzman...
Now, you were there for that, right?
Absolutely.
You were there. You were there when the cops came and they made him get undressed, for lack of a better term.
Well, that's horrible. It was terrible. Let me tell you one thing. First of all, they come to my office. They demand all the records. Now, they don't have a criminal thing, so they just searched my whole office for 4 hours. I had the records in my car. I eventually had an agreement with Michael that no one could ever have this records. I mean, we had that agreement. Now, the other thing was that I had to
And which record is that for the audience?
All his medical records. They had no right ever to release them. And the things they released were always lies. I mean, I never did half the things they said I did. Because they had records of 3 different doctors they were releasing. But the biggest thing is we had to go in a helicopter to Neverland, and they had to sit and take pictures of his genitalia. And they had to do that because Jordie Chandler had said he was circumcised, and Michael was not circumcised.
He was not circumcised.
No, but I mean, that's not important. What's important is it is the most devastating and horrible thing to do. They don't make anyone else do that. I mean, where do they make anyone else show pictures of their penis? Now, I'm just telling you the horrible things they did to him. Like the attorney in
now who was in that room? Who was in that room back in '93 when they did the check of the penis to see if there was a match?
Cochran, Howard Weitzman, who settled the case, which was stupid because there was no evidence whatsoever that he did anything.
Right.
I mean,
that's what Tom Mesereau said.
They put him under propofol. They put him under not propofol. They put him under sodium amytal, and basically they had him say that you'll say anything. And they finally had the kid say something. There were 2 doctors, Jordie's father and Tebenkin, who's really an anesthesiologist, a dental anesthesiologist, sort of a quack. They kept giving him drugs until the kid would admit something, but nothing really happened. And that's what the kid said. And what the father
now, what kind of drugs are we talking about, and how would this affect one
in
terms of
they were
taking
giving
the
him drugs they were giving the child intravenously to get him to admit he had sex with Michael. You understand? Remember all those truth serum drugs? But none of those drugs are reality because you can be suggested anything on them. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes, I understand. But for our audience, so if you take this drug because you're a doctor, obviously, what does it do to the brain so our listeners understand what you're talking about?
They're not really truth drugs. All these really truth drugs they supposedly were giving people that would put them out and give it to them so they would tell the truth. They would say they would respond to anything that you suggested to them. Don't you understand? It was ridiculous. It was nonsense what they were doing to Jordy. Because Jordy, nothing happened to him. But finally, they put him under, these two doctors, and got him to admit something which he later said was totally a lie. You understand? When you're giving these truth serums, it's nonsense like sodium mannitol and all these barbiturates they used to use. It's nonsense. They're not truth serums. So they had them admit things that never happened. Nothing. There was no evidence that anything ever happened between Michael and Jordan. You know that.
Now, was there ever a match, from what you understand?
To anything? No. Zero. Negative.
No match.
Never any match. No. Jordy's father wanted to write screenplays. Carrie Fisher was
of Robin Hood, right?
What? He wrote
Robin Hood.
Men in Tights. He wrote Men in Tights for Mel Brooks. And that was a big bomb, which I thought was terrible, which I told Mel Brooks' wife, Anne Bancroft, was terrible. But I'm telling you, this guy wanted to write screenplays, and that's why he wanted to rape with Michael. But this man was Carrie Fisher, Princess Leia's dentist. So I heard the whole story of what he was going to do before he did it. And this was all a planned thing, really, to embarrass Michael and make him feel terrible. But
now, who do you think was the culprit of this? I mean, is it true that Tom Sneddon had it out for him, who just recently passed away? Two-part question. What's your thoughts on him?
Tom Sneddon was horribly out for him. Tom Sneddon was, Jimmy Connors is a tennis player?
Yes.
He's a famous tennis player. His son went up to Sneddon at a banquet and told him, I won't even use the word, what he told him, but he was a guy who just wanted to be famous. Don't you understand? Half these people want money and fame. They're greedy. And they want to use poor Michael for it. And Michael was the sweetest human being you would ever meet. Michael was, was with women. I was with him twice when he was with women. One being my nurse.
With women. Tell us about that.
Well, he was with my nurse. And I was in the Four Seasons Hotel in London, and they had sex all night. Heard it through the top roof.
Are you serious?
Yeah, I swear to God, on my mother's grave. I heard it all night in the Four Seasons Hotel. And I had to listen to them
And you
all
wanted
night.
to set the record straight that Michael Jackson
here's the thing.
Was not
Michael
gay.
Jackson was totally straight. I never said he was gay. Jason Pfeiffer said he was gay. So, Harvey Levin, you can believe Harvey Levin like you can believe no one because he just lies all the time.
He set you up for that, in other words.
Everything has been set up because I never said that he was gay. And if he was, it wouldn't be a terrible thing, but he didn't even know what gay was. When we were going to see Michelle Vizhnikoff, the great dancer, I had to show him a video of a movie called Paris is Burning for what gay people were like. You understand? So he used to call gay people legendary. That word legendary. Like when he first saw RuPaul, they were legendary. He wasn't offended by gay people at all because, there's so many of them in Hollywood. But he was not that. He was straight. He loved women. But his favorite time was making people happy as a poor performer, the same way Elvis Presley was. I had a long talk with someone I can't say who was very, very close to Elvis Presley, the closest person in the world. I talked to her for hours. And Elvis and Michael were very similar. They were consummate entertainers. And that's exactly what they were. And Michael just wanted to entertain, make people happy, and help people's lives. I gave him $1 million, for his charity, Heal the World, and he used it for children. He didn't steal it like a lot of people would. He helped me with the first AIDS fundraiser in Orange County. I had raised $300 million for AIDS. And we did all these things. But you have to understand that I knew a lot. Because basically when people look at what happened, it was never about Michael. They wanted his music catalog, and that's what Sony ended up with. Because basically they did not promote his record Invincible, and John Branca ended up being the trustee of his of the Jackson estate based on a will that was signed on July 7, 2002 in Los Angeles. Unfortunately, on that day, Michael Jackson was in New York City with Al Sharpton, so the will is a fraud. I mean, there's so many other things you have to look at. I mean, let's begin to look at Conrad Murray. Now, let's begin to look at the history of Conrad Murray. Michael had a problem with propofol since the 80s, and how it began was he had a plastic surgeon named Stephen Hoffman, who always would put it on. He did 30 to 40 nose jobs on him, and all those scalp surgeries after he would have had the scalp burn. But Michael had lupus, and, he diagnosed that, and you couldn't cut. I told Steve not to cut, but Steve put him out so much that he could not sleep without propofol. And every tour he went, he had to have propofol. Now, propofol is a very, very dangerous general anesthetic. It's a very short way between life or death. Now, you have to be a really educated general anesthesiologist to give it to you. Okay, now the first time they had to make a very big intervention on this was on the history tour, when I found that Stephen Hoffman was back there, ill-equipped, and we had to make an intervention, and we did not know what to do. So I got his internist and a drug expert, Mark Hansel, and basically what they decided to do is get an anesthesiologist for the second half of the tour, because the problem with this drug, propofol, is if you stop it, you have terrible insomnia, you can't sleep. One extra drop of it, you drop dead. But here you have a person like Conrad Murray who's totally a quack. Now, if you have the greatest entertainer in the world, you hire the greatest doctor. Now, remember this. AEG hired Murray. Michael never signed the agreement because we had an agreement, Michael, and we talked about this in 2007, that you should never, ever allow anyone ever to give you this drug by an anesthesiologist. And Murray was ill-equipped. Murray had no resuscitation equipment. He had nothing. And what did he do when he found Michael dead up there in his room? He sat around for 2 or 3 minutes and did nothing, Murray. Then he calls on his cell phone, but he can't call, he says, emergency, because he doesn't know the address of the house, which everyone knew. Then he decides to call security. No one answers. Then he finally calls the cook, who finally figures out the number. So it's 30 minutes, and Michael had a heartbeat at that point before they call the paramedics. And he should have had all the equipment when you give he's giving general anesthesia in a bedroom. It's insane. And so people
totally
don't
insane.
realize,
the doctors testified to.
but
we had
you know what? No one ever
testified.
told you he did. Okay, why did they hire Murray? You want to know why? Tom Barak was in business with Philip Andrus, okay? And Tom Barak was foreclosing on Murray's home. Michael wanted
Who is Tom
no
Barak
part
for the audience?
What?
Who is Tom Barak so the audience knows?
Basically, Michael went to Las Vegas. Michael went to Las Vegas to work with a guy named Jack Bishner. Once his family showed up, he became weird, okay? Which meant to me he was going to be back on propofol. Because he was fine in Europe. There was no stress. But when he went through stress, he used propofol to sleep. So I go to his home in Las Vegas, and there's this guy, Conrad Murray, who doesn't know what he's doing. Okay, so I asked Murray to leave. Then I have a long talk with Michael. I said, Michael, whatever you do, if you're under stress, you must have an anesthesiologist. You cannot do this. And you can't do this because you're going to end up killing yourself. I mean, this guy is incompetent. You have to have him give you an anesthesiologist. Now, they made sure they had total access to his catalog. You know that, these people did. They bought off the Prince of Lorraine for about $8 million. And they had total access to everything. But why would they use a totally incompetent person to give him propofol, which is a highly dangerous drug? Because they're more interested in his catalog and the value of his catalog. And see, people don't understand why.
How much was the catalog worth?
Well, the catalog was worth $2 billion. But the first year it took in after his death over $1 billion. Now, why was Michael touring? Because he was broke. Because by 2003, because Branca had deals both with Sony and with Michael, they owned the catalog because he had to pay them so much money to promote Invincible. It was all about the catalog. It had nothing to do with Michael at that point. They didn't care about Michael. Michael was in very bad physical shape. I mean, why do you think he's going to do 30 shows? You saw him. He never moonwalking. This is it. And people say, why did I rebuild his face? Because he had all this surgery. Unless he looked great, he would never perform. So that's what I dealt with my whole life. You know, all these things, but I would never do anything wrong to a human being, especially him, because I cared about him